When she stepped out of the limousine beside the most powerful businessman in the country, no one recognized the woman her own family had thrown out 2 years earlier for being financially useless. What they didn't know was that humiliation had only been the first step in the most brilliant revenge ever planned. Sarah Mitchell's hands trembled as she clutched the eviction notice, the paper cold against her fingertips in the October morning air. 24 hours. That's all the time her own family had given her to pack her life into boxes and disappear from the only home she'd ever known. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could, but what shattered her completely was the sound of her mother's voice through the thin walls, laughing on the phone with someone about how they'd finally gotten rid of their financial burden. She pressed her back against her childhood bedroom door, sliding down until she sat on the hardwood floor that had witnessed her first steps, her teenage tears, her dreams of making her family proud. Now those same walls felt like a prison she couldn't escape fast enough. The irony wasn't lost on her. The daughter who had worked 16-hour days trying to save the family business was being thrown out like garbage because she hadn't generated enough profit to satisfy their greed. "Sarah, are you done packing yet?" David's voice carried through the hallway, cold and businesslike. Her older brother had always been their father's golden boy, but even she hadn't expected him to stand by and watch this happen. "The moving truck will be here soon, and we need you out before the realtor shows the house to potential buyers." She wanted to scream that this was her home too, that she'd sacrificed her own dreams to work in their failing accounting firm, that every penny she'd ever earned had gone straight into keeping their family business afloat. Instead, she wiped her tears with the back of her hand and began folding the same clothes she'd worn to work every day for the past 5 years. Each piece of clothing held memories of late nights spent balancing books, of client meetings where she'd saved deals her father had nearly destroyed with his arrogance, of small victories that had never been acknowledged or celebrated. The sound of expensive heels clicking against hardwood announced her mother's approach. Patricia Mitchell appeared in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, her face showing no trace of emotion. She looked at Sarah as if she were a stranger, not the daughter she'd given birth to 28 years ago. "I hope you understand this is nothing personal," Patricia said, adjusting her pearl necklace. "It's just business. The family needs to make some tough decisions, and keeping dead weight around isn't financially responsible." Dead weight. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been working since she was 16, putting herself through community college while helping with the family business, sacrificing her social life and romantic relationships to be available whenever they needed her, and now she was dead weight. "Mom, I've worked for this family for over a decade. I've never asked for anything except for us to support you forever," Patricia interrupted. "You're almost 30, Sarah. Most successful people your age have built something for themselves by now. We can't keep carrying you." The gaslighting was masterful, Sarah realized. They'd convinced themselves that she was the problem, not the solution. They'd rewritten history to make her the villain in their story of financial struggle, erasing every sacrifice she'd made, every weekend she'd given up, every date she'd cancelled to fix their mistakes. Her father's heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Robert Mitchell filled the doorway with his imposing frame, his face red with the anger that had defined most of Sarah's childhood memories. He'd been drinking again. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, even from across the room. "You still here?" he asked, checking his expensive watch. "We told you yesterday this was happening. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Dad, please. Can't we talk about this?" "I know I haven't brought in the big clients yet, but I've kept the books clean, I've managed the staff, You've done exactly what we paid you to do," Robert cut her off. "And barely that. Do you know how much money we've lost because of your conservative approach to investments? How many opportunities we've missed because you were too scared to take risks?" Sarah's mouth fell open. The conservative approach had been his idea. She'd wanted to diversify their client base, to explore new markets, to modernize their outdated systems. Every time she'd suggested innovation, he'd shut her down, calling her ideas too risky or unrealistic. Now her caution was being used against her. "I have the records, Dad. Every email, every meeting note. You specifically told me to... Don't you dare try to rewrite history." David appeared behind their father, his MBA confidence radiating from every pore. "We've all discussed this, Sarah. You're holding us back. We need team players who can bring in revenue, not employees who just maintain the status quo. Team players, revenue, status quo. They were talking about her like she was a stranger they were firing, not their own flesh and blood. Sarah looked at the three people who were supposed to love her unconditionally and saw nothing but cold calculation in their eyes. This wasn't a family making a hard decision. This was a business disposing of an asset they no longer found valuable. The moving boxes felt heavier than they should have as she carried them downstairs. Each step took her further away from the life she'd known, but also closer to something she couldn't yet name. Freedom, maybe. Or at least the chance to discover who she was when she wasn't constantly trying to earn approval that would never come. As she loaded the last box into her beaten-up Honda Civic, Patricia handed her an envelope. "There's $3,000 in there," she said, as if she were being generous. "That should be enough to get you started somewhere else." $3,000. Less than what David spent on his car payment each month, less than what they'd spent on Patricia's last shopping trip to New York. It was insulting, but Sarah took it anyway. She'd need every penny to survive whatever came next. The drive away from her childhood home felt surreal. She kept expecting to wake up from this nightmare, to find herself back in her bedroom with her family apologizing for the cruel joke. But the boxes in her back seat were real, the eviction notice was real, and the burning sensation in her chest was definitely real. She had nowhere to go. Her few friends from high school had moved away years ago, and she'd never had time to build relationships outside of work and family. The isolation hit her like a wave. She was completely alone in a way she'd never been before. The first motel she found was a rundown place on the outskirts of town, the kind of establishment that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions. The clerk, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, seemed to sense Sarah's desperation. "First week in advance," the woman said gently. $200. Sarah counted out the bills with shaking hands, watching her savings disappear with each payment. She'd have to find work immediately, but who would hire someone whose only experience was with a family business that had just kicked her out? The motel room smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Sarah sat on the thin mattress and finally allowed herself to cry, really cry, for the first time since this nightmare began. The tears came in waves, carrying with them years of suppressed frustration, unacknowledged sacrifices, and the devastating realization that the people she'd loved most in the world had never really loved her back. But somewhere between the tears and the fear, something else began to grow. Anger. Pure, clean anger that cut through the sadness like a knife. They'd thrown her away like she was nothing, but they were about to learn something important about Sarah Mitchell. She wasn't nothing. She was everything they'd never bothered to see. The next morning brought new challenges. Sarah put on her best professional outfit and began the humiliating process of job hunting. The first 3 interviews went terribly. Without references from her family business, she looked like an unemployed woman with a gap in her resume and no verifiable work history. The 4th interview was at a small coffee shop called The Grind, tucked between a laundromat and a used bookstore in a part of town she'd never explored. The owner, Maya Rodriguez, was a woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes and calloused hands that spoke of someone who worked hard for everything she had. "I see you don't have traditional references," Maya said, reviewing Sarah's hastily prepared resume. "Want to tell me what's really going on?" Something about Maya's direct approach made Sarah's carefully rehearsed story crumble. Instead of the professional explanation she'd planned, the truth came pouring out. The family business, the eviction, the complete betrayal by the people who were supposed to protect her. Maya listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. When Sarah finished, Maya poured 2 cups of coffee and slid one across the small table. "I've been running this place for 8 years, Maya said. "Started with nothing but a dream and a loan I'm still paying off. I've seen plenty of people who've been knocked down by life, and I can usually tell who's going to get back up." She paused, studying Sarah's face with the intensity of someone making an important decision. "You've got something in your eyes that I recognize. It's not just hurt, it's determination. The kind that comes when you realize you've got nothing left to lose and everything to prove." Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't experienced in months. "I can offer you 20 hours a week to start. Minimum wage plus tips. It's not glamorous work. You'll be making coffee, cleaning tables, dealing with difficult customers. But I'll tell you what I told myself when I started this place. Every empire begins with a single step, and sometimes that step is backwards before it's forwards. That night, Sarah lay on the motel bed and stared at the water stains on the ceiling. For the first time since the eviction notice had arrived, she felt something that might have been hope. It was fragile and small, but it was there. She thought about her family, probably sleeping peacefully in their comfortable beds, convinced they'd made the right choice. They'd expected her to fail, to come crawling back within a few weeks, grateful for whatever scraps they'd be willing to throw her. But they'd made one critical mistake. They'd underestimated the strength they'd inadvertently built in her through years of criticism and conditional love. They'd taught her to work harder than anyone else, to solve problems others couldn't solve, to find value where others saw none. Now she was going to use those skills not for them, but for herself. The coffee shop job was harder than she'd expected, but also strangely satisfying. There was something honest about the work. When you made a good cup of coffee, the customer smiled. When you cleaned a table well, it stayed clean. Results were immediate and measurable, unlike the complex web of family dynamics and unspoken expectations she'd navigated for years. Maya turned out to be an unexpected mentor. During slow afternoon periods, she'd share stories about building her business, about the setbacks and small victories that had shaped her journey. She talked about the importance of financial independence for women, about the difference between being valued and being valuable. Your family taught you that your worth was tied to what you could do for them, Maya said one afternoon while they restocked supplies. But real worth comes from what you can do for yourself and the world. They confused being needed with being loved. The observation hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. She'd spent her entire adult life being needed by her family, but had she ever been truly loved by them? Love was supposed to be unconditional, but theirs had come with a price tag she could never afford to pay. 3 weeks into her new life, Sarah was wiping down tables after the evening rush when she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Two men in expensive suits were discussing a business deal over espresso, their voices carrying in the empty cafe. "The Mitchell Group is hemorrhaging money," one was saying. "Robert Mitchell's been cooking the books for months, trying to hide how bad things really are. Word is they're going to lose their biggest client next month." Sarah's hands stilled on the table. The Mitchell Group was her family's business. "Serves them right," the other man replied. "I heard they threw out their best accountant a few weeks ago, some family drama. Now they're scrambling to find someone who can clean up the mess she was probably preventing all along." Her heart pounded as the pieces fell into place. They hadn't thrown her out because she was dead weight. They'd thrown her out because they needed a scapegoat for the financial disaster they'd created. She'd been the only thing standing between them and complete collapse. And now that she was gone, the truth was becoming impossible to hide. For a moment, she felt a surge of vindication, but it was quickly followed by something darker. The realization that her family's downfall wouldn't bring her the satisfaction she'd expected. She didn't want to win by watching them lose. She wanted to win by becoming something they could never tear down. As she locked up the coffee shop that night, Sarah made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She wasn't just going to survive this betrayal. She was going to transform it into the foundation of something extraordinary. She pulled out her phone and began researching business development courses, investment strategies, entrepreneurship programs. If her family had taught her anything valuable, it was how to spot financial opportunities and avoid the mistakes that destroyed businesses. The difference was, now she'd be building something for herself. But as she walked back to her motel through the cool October night, Sarah had no idea that someone had been watching her journey with great interest. Someone who recognized potential when he saw it, who understood the value of a person forged in the fire of betrayal and loss. Someone who was about to offer her opportunities beyond her wildest dreams. The business course Sarah enrolled in met twice a week in the basement of the local community center. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as she sat in a circle of plastic chairs with 12 other people who, like her, were trying to rebuild their lives from scratch. There was Maria, a single mother who wanted to start a catering business. James, a laid-off factory worker with dreams of opening an auto repair shop. And Henry Walsh, a distinguished man in his 70s, whose expensive clothes seemed out of place in the modest setting. Henry intrigued Sarah from the first class. While others fumbled through basic business concepts, he asked questions that revealed decades of experience. His voice carried the authority of someone who had built and lost fortunes, who understood the game at levels most people never reached. When the instructor struggled to answer Henry's more complex questions, Sarah found herself jumping in with insights that surprised even her. "You have an intuitive understanding of market dynamics," Henry told her after the third class, as they walked to the parking lot together. "Most people learn business principles from books. You seem to understand them from somewhere deeper." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. It had been so long since anyone had complimented her intelligence that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen as capable. "I worked in my family's accounting firm for years," she said, unlocking her car door. "I guess I picked up more than I realized." Henry stopped walking. Something in his expression shifted, becoming more focused, more calculating. "Mitchell Group?" he asked quietly. Sarah's blood ran cold. "You know them?" "I know of them." Henry's voice was careful, diplomatic. "Robert Mitchell and I crossed paths many years ago. Different circumstances, of course, but I remember the name. The way he said it made Sarah's stomach twist. There was history there, something unpleasant that Henry was too polite to elaborate on. She wanted to ask more questions, but something in his expression warned her off. "Perhaps we could continue our conversation over coffee sometime," Henry suggested. "I find your perspective on business development quite refreshing." 3 days later, Sarah sat across from Henry in a quiet corner of an upscale restaurant she could never have afforded on her coffee shop wages. He'd insisted on paying, brushing off her protests with the gentle authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. "I need to tell you something about your father," Henry said without preamble, once their orders had been placed. "Something that might help you understand why your situation unfolded the way it did." Sarah's hands tightened around her water glass. "What do you mean?" 30 years ago, Robert and I were partners in a real estate development project, a small shopping center on the outskirts of town. I provided the capital, he provided the local connections and regulatory expertise. Henry paused, his eyes growing distant. The project was successful beyond our expectations. We were looking at profits that would have set both our families up for generations. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. She'd never heard her father mention any partnership with Henry Walsh. "What happened?" "Your father decided he deserved a larger share of the profits. He used his connections to push through some regulatory changes that essentially forced me out of the project. Legal, technically, but ethically questionable. I lost not just my investment, but my reputation in this community. I had to rebuild everything from scratch." Sarah felt sick. The pattern was so familiar, her father taking credit for other people's work, manipulating situations to his advantage, leaving others to deal with the consequences. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "Because when I saw you in that class, asking the right questions, showing real understanding of complex principles, I realized you might be the daughter of Robert Mitchell, but you're nothing like him." Henry leaned forward, his voice intense. "You have something he never had, genuine integrity. And I think with the right guidance, you could build something remarkable." Over the following weeks, Henry became more than a mentor. He became the father figure Sarah had never really had. He introduced her to concepts that went far beyond the basic business course: market analysis, investment strategies, the psychology of negotiation. He taught her to see patterns in financial data that others missed, to identify opportunities in places others overlooked. More importantly, he helped her understand her own value. "You spent years being told you weren't enough," he said during one of their coffee meetings. "But the truth is, you were too much for them. Your insights threatened your father's authority. Your integrity made his shortcuts look shabby by comparison. They didn't get rid of you because you were failing. They got rid of you because you were making their failures too obvious." The revelation was like a key turning in a lock Sarah hadn't even known existed. Suddenly, years of criticism and dismissal made sense in a completely different way. She wasn't the problem that needed to be solved. She was the solution they'd been too prideful to accept. But the real breakthrough came on a cold December morning, when Maya approached her during the coffee shop's morning rush. "I've been watching you," Maya said, refilling the espresso machine. "The way you organize inventory, how you handle the difficult customers, your suggestions about streamlining our ordering process. You're not just working here. You're studying this place like it's a laboratory." Sarah looked up from the register, caught off guard by Maya's directness. "I've been thinking about expanding," Maya continued. "Maybe opening a second location or adding a catering service. But I need a partner, someone who understands both the numbers side and the customer service side. Someone I can trust." The offer hung in the air like a lifeline. Sarah's first instinct was to say yes immediately, but Henry's training had taught her to think strategically. "What kind of partnership are you thinking about?" she asked. 50-50, Maya said without hesitation. "I provide the experience and the existing customer base. You provide the business development skills and help with startup costs for the expansion. We build something together." That evening, Sarah called Henry to discuss the opportunity. His response surprised her. "It's a good offer," he said thoughtfully, "but I think you're capable of something bigger. Maya's coffee shop could be your training ground, but it shouldn't be your destination." "What do you mean?" "I mean you have the potential to build an empire, not just manage a small business. The question is, are you ready to think that big?" Henry's words echoed in her mind for days. Empire. The concept felt both thrilling and terrifying. 6 months ago, she'd been grateful for a job making minimum wage. Now she was being encouraged to dream on a scale she'd never imagined. The decision became clearer when she overheard another conversation at the coffee shop, this time about her own family. 2 women at a corner table were discussing the local business community's latest scandal. "Did you hear about Mitchell Group?" one was saying. "They're being investigated by the IRS. Apparently there were some serious irregularities in their accounting practices." Sarah's hands trembled as she wiped down nearby tables, straining to hear more. "I heard they tried to blame it on an employee they fired," the second woman replied. "But the timeline doesn't add up. The problem started after she left, not before." "Robert Mitchell always was a snake," the first woman said. "I'm just surprised it took this long for his chickens to come home to roost." That night, Sarah stared at her reflection in the motel bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her was different from the one who'd been evicted 6 months ago. Leaner, stronger, with eyes that held secrets and possibilities her family had never imagined. She pulled out her phone and began researching her family's situation. What she found made her stomach turn. The IRS investigation was real, and it was serious. The irregularities they were investigating were exactly the kind of creative accounting practices she'd been trying to prevent for years. Her father had ignored every warning she'd given him, dismissed every suggestion for legitimate tax strategies, and now the consequences were catching up with him. The irony was devastating. They'd thrown her out to make her the scapegoat, but her absence had only made their problems worse. For a moment she felt a familiar urge to call them, to offer help, to try to fix the mess they'd created. But then she remembered her mother calling her dead weight, her brother treating her like a disposable employee, her father's drunken anger when she'd tried to defend herself. They'd made their choices. Now she would make hers. The next morning, Sarah accepted Maya's partnership offer, but with a modification that surprised even her. "I want to accept," she told Maya, "but I'd like to propose something different. Instead of a second coffee shop, what if we created a business consulting firm that specializes in helping small businesses optimize their operations?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "That's a pretty big pivot from coffee." "Think about it," Sarah said, her excitement building. "You've successfully run this place for 8 years. You know what works and what doesn't. I have the accounting and analysis skills. Together we could help other small business owners avoid the mistakes that destroy companies." The idea had been percolating in Sarah's mind for weeks, inspired by watching Maya's efficient operation and contrasting it with her family's dysfunctional approach to business management. Maya was quiet for a long moment, then smiled slowly. "You know what? That's not just a good idea. It's a brilliant idea. There are hundreds of small businesses in this area that are struggling with exactly the kind of problems we know how to solve." They spent the next month developing their business plan. Sarah threw herself into the work with an intensity that surprised everyone around her, including herself. She researched market conditions, analyzed competitor pricing, developed service packages that addressed real needs in the local business community. Henry watched her transformation with something that might have been pride. "You're not the same woman who walked into that community center 6 months ago," he observed during one of their regular coffee meetings. "No, Sarah agreed. "I'm not." But she was about to discover that her journey was being observed by someone else entirely, someone whose interest in her went far beyond casual mentorship or business partnerships. Alexander Kane had built his reputation on identifying potential before others recognized it existed. His investment firm had turned unknown startups into billion-dollar companies by seeing patterns and possibilities that escaped conventional analysis. He didn't attend small business conferences or community networking events, except when something particularly interesting caught his attention. Sarah Mitchell had first appeared on his radar 3 months ago, when one of his analysts mentioned an unusual pattern in local business registration filings. A woman with no significant previous business experience was starting a consulting firm with what appeared to be a remarkably sophisticated understanding of market dynamics. Kane had learned long ago that the most valuable investments weren't in established companies with predictable returns, but in exceptional individuals who had been overlooked or undervalued by the market. His initial research into Sarah's background had revealed a story that intrigued him. A woman with obvious talent who had been discarded by her own family, now rebuilding herself from nothing. He'd been discreetly monitoring her progress ever since. The business development conference where Sarah had been invited to speak was Kane's first opportunity to observe her directly. He sat in the back of the hotel conference room, watching as she presented her analysis of small business failure patterns to an audience of established entrepreneurs and investors. Her presentation was flawless, not just professional, but insightful in ways that revealed genuine understanding rather than memorized theories. She fielded questions with confidence, offered solutions that demonstrated real-world experience, and displayed the kind of strategic thinking that couldn't be taught in business school. But what impressed Kane most was something subtler, the way she handled a deliberately hostile question from an audience member who clearly wanted to embarrass her. "Ms. Mitchell," the man had said, his voice dripping with condescension, "your consulting firm has been in operation for less than 6 months. What makes you think you're qualified to advise established businesses?" Sarah had smiled, completely unruffled by the attack. "You're absolutely right that my firm is new, but the principles I'm discussing aren't theoretical to me. They're lessons I learned by watching a family business destroy itself through exactly the mistakes I'm helping others avoid. Sometimes the best teacher isn't success, but the opportunity to observe failure up close and understand why it happens." The response was perfect, honest about her experience while turning her perceived weakness into a strength. The hostile questioner had looked foolish, while Sarah had emerged with increased credibility. Kane made his decision that afternoon. 2 days later, Sarah received a phone call that would change her life forever. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Alexander Kane's office. Mr. Kane would like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss a potential business opportunity." Sarah's phone nearly slipped from her hands. Alexander Kane was a legend in the business world, a man who turned small ideas into massive enterprises, whose investment decisions were studied in graduate programs across the country. She'd read about him in magazines, seen him quoted in financial newspapers, but never imagined their paths would cross. "I'm sorry," she said, certain she'd misheard. "Did you say Alexander Kane?" "Yes, ma'am." "Would Thursday afternoon work for your schedule?" Sarah looked around the modest office she shared with Maya, with its second-hand furniture and inspirational posters on the walls. The contrast between her current situation and the opportunity being offered was so vast it felt surreal. But then she remembered Henry's words about thinking bigger, about building empires rather than just managing small businesses. Maybe it was time to find out exactly how big she was capable of dreaming. The glass elevator climbed toward the 42nd floor of the Kane Tower, and Sarah watched the city shrink beneath her feet. Her reflection stared back from the polished steel doors. Professional blazer, hair pulled back in a neat bun, the confidence she'd learned to project even when her heart was racing. 6 months ago, she'd been folding clothes into boxes in her childhood bedroom. Now she was ascending to meet one of the most powerful men in the country. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that looked like something from a magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, while modern art pieces worth more than most people's houses decorated the walls. The receptionist, an elegant woman with a warm smile, gestured toward a set of mahogany doors. "Mr. Kane is waiting for you, Ms. Mitchell." Sarah's heels clicked against marble floors as she walked through doors that opened to reveal an office that defied her expectations. Instead of the cold, intimidating space she'd imagined, Alexander Kane's office felt warm and lived in. Books lined the walls, family photos sat on side tables, and the man himself stood with his back to her, looking out at the city skyline. When he turned around, Sarah felt her breath catch. She'd seen his picture in magazines, but photographs hadn't captured the intensity of his presence. Alexander Kane was tall and lean, with silver threading through dark hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never needed to prove his worth to anyone. "Miss Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. His voice was warm, cultured, with just a hint of something she couldn't identify. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me," Sarah replied, proud that her voice remained steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Please sit." Kane gestured toward a comfortable seating area away from his desk. "I prefer conversations to meetings when possible." As they settled into leather chairs, Kane studied her with the intensity of someone making an important assessment. Sarah found herself doing the same, trying to understand why one of the most successful men in the country wanted to meet with a woman who'd been homeless 6 months ago. "I attended your presentation at the Business Development Conference last week," Kane began. "Your analysis of small business failure patterns was impressive, but what caught my attention was how you handled that hostile question from the audience." Sarah remembered the moment, the condescending man who'd tried to embarrass her, and her response that had turned his attack into an opportunity to demonstrate her credibility. "Sometimes the best way to handle hostility is to acknowledge the truth it contains," she said carefully. Kane smiled, and Sarah noticed how it transformed his entire face. Exactly. Most people in that situation would have become defensive or tried to exaggerate their qualifications. You did something much smarter. You turned your perceived weakness into a strength by being completely honest about it. He stood and walked to his desk, returning with a thin folder. "I've done some research into your background," he continued, and Sarah's stomach clenched. "The Mitchell Group situation, your family's recent legal troubles, your current partnership with Maya Rodriguez." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm not responsible for my family's problems, Mr. Kane. I tried to prevent exactly the kind of—" "I know," Kane interrupted gently. "That's not why I brought it up. I'm interested in you precisely because of how you've handled an impossible situation. Most people who've been betrayed by their families would be consumed by bitterness or destroyed by self-doubt. You've used the experience as fuel to build something entirely new." He opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "Your consulting firm has been operational for 4 months. In that time, you've helped 12 small businesses improve their profit margins by an average of 37%. You've identified cost-cutting opportunities that your clients' previous accountants missed completely. And you've done all of this while working with virtually no startup capital." Sarah stared at the papers, amazed that someone had been tracking her work so closely. "How did you—" "I make it my business to identify exceptional talent before the market recognizes it," Kane said. "Especially talent that's been overlooked or undervalued by others. Your family's loss could be my gain if you're interested in thinking bigger than small business consulting." The phrase echoed Henry's words from months earlier. Thinking bigger, building empires instead of managing small businesses. "What did you have in mind?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the excitement out of her voice. Kane leaned forward, his expression becoming more intense. "I want to offer you a partnership. Not an investment in your existing business, but the opportunity to build something entirely new. A consulting firm that doesn't just help small businesses, one that transforms struggling companies into industry leaders." Sarah's heart began to race. "That sounds incredible, but I'm not sure I have the experience to—" "Experience is overrated," Kane interrupted. "Vision is what matters. The ability to see solutions where others see problems. The willingness to take calculated risks. The integrity to build something sustainable rather than just profitable." He stood and walked to the window, gesturing for her to join him. From this height, the city looked like a detailed model, all clean lines and organized patterns. "Tell me what you see," Kane said. Sarah looked out at the sprawling metropolis below. "I see thousands of businesses. Some succeeding, some failing, most just surviving somewhere in between. And what do you think determines which category they fall into? Sarah considered the question carefully. It felt like a test, and she suspected her answer would determine whether this conversation continued. Leadership, she said finally, not just at the top, but at every level. The businesses that succeed are the ones where people understand not just what they're supposed to do, but why they're doing it. Where there's alignment between individual goals and company objectives. Kane nodded slowly. Go on. The failing businesses are usually the ones where leadership has become disconnected from reality, where ego drives decisions instead of data, where short-term thinking sacrifices long-term sustainability. Sarah paused, thinking of her father's approach to business. They fail because they stop listening to their customers, to their employees, to the market itself. And the ones in the middle? They're the ones with the most potential, Sarah said, warming to the topic. They have good fundamentals but lack vision. They need someone to help them see possibilities they can't see themselves. Kane smiled, and Sarah realized she'd passed whatever test he'd been administering. That's exactly right, he said. And that's exactly what I want to build. A firm that specializes in taking those middle category businesses and transforming them into industry leaders. Over the next 2 hours, Kane outlined his vision in detail. It was ambitious beyond anything Sarah had imagined. A consulting firm with offices in major cities, teams of specialists who could address every aspect of business transformation, resources that would allow them to work with companies of any size. But why me? Sarah asked as their conversation wound down. You could partner with anyone. Harvard MBAs, former CEOs, people with decades of experience. Kane was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with that intense gaze. Because you understand something that can't be taught in business school, he said finally. You understand what it feels like to be undervalued, to have your contributions overlooked, to be thrown away by people who should have protected you. That experience gives you insight into organizational dysfunction that someone who's always been successful could never have. He paused, and something shifted in his expression, became more personal, more vulnerable. And because, he continued, his voice softer now, I recognize something in you that reminds me of myself 20 years ago. The hunger to prove that the people who dismissed you made the biggest mistake of their lives. Sarah felt something electric pass between them, a connection that went beyond business strategy and market analysis. For the first time since entering his office, she saw not the legendary Alexander Kane, but a man who had once been where she was now, hungry, driven, determined to transform pain into power. I need time to think about this, Sarah said, though every instinct was screaming at her to say yes immediately. Of course, Kane replied, but while you're thinking, I want you to consider something. Your family threw you away because they couldn't see your value. The market hasn't recognized your potential yet, because you haven't had the platform to demonstrate it. But I see it. And I'm offering you the chance to build something that will make your family's business look like a lemonade stand in comparison. As Sarah rode the elevator back down to street level, her mind raced with possibilities. The offer was everything she'd dreamed of and more. The chance to build something meaningful, to work with the kind of resources she'd never imagined having access to transform her painful experience into expertise that could help others. But it was also terrifying. Partnering with Alexander Kane meant stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, taking risks on a scale that could either elevate her beyond her wildest dreams or destroy her completely. That evening, she called Henry to discuss the opportunity. His response surprised her. I've been expecting this call for months, he said. Kane has a reputation for identifying exceptional talent early. The fact that he approached you isn't surprising, it's inevitable. But am I ready for something this big? Sarah asked. 6 months ago I was living in a motel. Now I'm being offered a chance to build a consulting empire. Sarah, Henry's voice was gentle but firm. You've been ready for something this big your entire life. You just never had the opportunity to prove it. Your family's rejection wasn't about your capabilities. It was about their fear of what you might become if they ever stopped holding you back. The conversation with Henry gave Sarah the clarity she needed. The next morning, she called Kane's office and accepted his offer. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the lobby of the newest Kane Mitchell consulting office, watching as her team put the finishing touches on their grand opening event. The space was everything she'd dreamed of, modern, professional, designed to inspire confidence in potential clients while creating an environment where her employees could do their best work. Maya had joined the team as Director of Operations, bringing her practical experience and people skills to complement Sarah's analytical abilities. Henry had agreed to serve as a senior advisor, his decades of experience providing wisdom and guidance. The team they'd assembled was small but exceptional, people who shared Sarah's vision of business transformation based on genuine understanding rather than generic solutions. The grand opening event was scheduled to begin in 2 hours, and Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness. Local business leaders would be attending, including reporters from the business journals and potential clients who could make or break their reputation in the market. But first, she had something important to do. Sarah walked to her office and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found a number she hadn't called in 8 months. Her finger hovered over her mother's name for a long moment before she finally pressed dial. "Hello?" Patricia Mitchell's voice was cautious, uncertain. "Hi, Mom. It's Sarah." Silence stretched between them, filled with 8 months of unspoken words and unresolved pain. "Sarah?" Patricia's voice was barely a whisper. We've been following the news about your business. The articles in the business journal, the announcement about your partnership with Alexander Kane. Have you?" Sarah kept her voice neutral, professional. "We had no idea that you could..." Patricia's usual composure seemed to be cracking. "Your father wants to talk to you. About the problems with the IRS, about how we might be able to work together to..." "Mom," Sarah interrupted gently, "I'm not calling to discuss business opportunities." "Then why are you calling?" Sarah looked out her office window at the city below, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. "I'm calling to tell you that I forgive you," she said simply. "All of you. I forgive you for throwing me away, for trying to make me believe I wasn't enough, for treating your own daughter like a disposable employee." Patricia's breath caught audibly. "But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation," Sarah continued. "You made your choice 8 months ago when you decided I had no value to your family. I've spent the time since then discovering my own value, building something meaningful, surrounding myself with people who see my worth. Sarah, please. We made mistakes, but we're still your family." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Family doesn't throw each other away when times get tough. Family doesn't use love as a bargaining chip. You were my relatives, but Maya and Henry and Alexander, they're my family now." She paused, looking at the framed photo on her desk. Herself, Maya, and Henry at the signing ceremony for their business partnership, all 3 of them grinning with the joy of people who had found their tribe. "I hope you find a way to solve your problems," Sarah said. "I genuinely do. But I won't be part of the solution, because I'm no longer part of the problem you created by never valuing what you had." She ended the call and turned off her phone, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. An hour later, Alexander Kane appeared in her office doorway, looking impeccable in a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. "Ready for tonight?" he asked. And Sarah noticed something different in his expression, warmth that went beyond professional partnership, an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I think so," she replied. "Are you nervous about launching our first major venture together?" Kane stepped into her office and closed the door behind him, his eyes never leaving her face. "Sarah," he said, his voice lower than usual, "there's something I need to tell you before tonight's event begins." Sarah's heart began to race. Something in his tone suggested this conversation was about more than business strategy. "What is it?" Kane moved closer until he was standing just a few feet away from her desk. "When I first approached you about this partnership, it was purely professional. I saw exceptional talent that had been overlooked, and I wanted to build something meaningful together." Sarah felt her breath catch. "And now?" "Now," Kane said, his voice soft but intense, "I realized that what I felt wasn't just professional admiration. It was something much more personal. Watching you rebuild yourself from nothing, seeing your strength and integrity in action, working alongside you these past months." He paused, searching her face for some sign of how his words were being received. "I'm in love with you, Sarah. Not just with your mind or your business instincts, but with everything you are. Your resilience, your capacity for forgiveness, even when it's not deserved, your ability to turn pain into wisdom. Sarah's world seemed to tilt on its axis. The most powerful, sought-after man she'd ever known was standing in her office, telling her he loved her. The girl who'd been thrown away by her own family was being cherished by someone who could have anyone. "Alexander," she whispered, standing and moving around her desk until they were face to face. "I know this complicates things," he continued. "I know mixing business with personal feelings isn't always wise. But I couldn't let another day pass without telling you how I feel." Sarah reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw beneath her fingertips. "It complicates everything," she agreed, "and I don't care." When he kissed her, it felt like the final piece of her transformation falling into place. She was no longer the discarded daughter trying to earn approval from people who would never give it. She was a successful businesswoman being loved by a man who saw her true worth, surrounded by chosen family who valued everything she had to offer. As they broke apart, Sarah smiled at the man who had offered her not just business partnership, but the chance to build a life bigger than anything she'd ever imagined possible. "So," she said, straightening his tie with hands that no longer trembled, "ready to show the world what Sarah Mitchell can really do?" Kane smiled back, his eyes full of pride and love and infinite possibility. "I've been ready since the moment I met you." 2 hours later, Sarah Mitchell descended from a luxury car at the grand opening of Kane Mitchell Consulting, her hand in Alexander's, wearing a dress that cost more than she'd earned in her first month at the coffee shop. The cameras flashed as the business community's newest power couple made their debut, but Sarah barely noticed the attention. She was thinking about her family, probably watching the coverage on television, finally understanding exactly what they had thrown away. She was thinking about Maya and Henry, beaming with pride as their chosen daughter stepped into the spotlight she'd always deserved. But mostly she was thinking about the future she was building, not in spite of the pain she'd endured, but because of how it had shaped her into someone strong enough to seize every opportunity, wise enough to recognize true value, and brave enough to love without reservation. The sweetest revenge, Sarah had learned, wasn't destroying the people who had hurt her. It was building something so beautiful, so successful, so undeniably magnificent, that their rejection became the best thing that had ever happened to her. As she and Alexander walked into their grand opening celebration, Sarah Mitchell smiled, knowing that her real story was just beginning.